Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 113. I hope everyone had a rich and meaningful Zman Cherusenu, a transcendent and redemptive Yom Tov, B'tzias Mitzrayim in all its dimensions and interpretations. Mitzrayim from the word Mitzarim v'Gvulim. Mitzrayim comes from the word Meitzar, which is like boundaries, which includes, and you can fill in the blanks, all inhibitions, fears, insecurities, constraints, traps, and so on that inhibit and block us, impede us from getting where we need to go. And that's why Mitzrayim lives on, Yitzis Mitzrayim lives on, B'chol der v'der, in every generation, as the Alter Rebbe adds in Tanya, B'chol yem v'yem, that we, Chayev Adam, a person is responsible to envision, perceive themselves as if they're leaving Mitzrayim, not necessarily the geographical land of Egypt, but the psychological, emotional, and spiritual Mitzrayim that each of us deal with, each in our own personal way. Now that we finished Yom Tov, it's Isru Chag, Ba'avusim. Isru Chag means it's bound, the day that's still bound to the holiday. So we continue and carry that energy into this day, which in a sense is like a mamutza, as the Rebbe explains in a number of talks, this type of interface between the Yom Tov and as we enter the return to our regular routines and patterns and day-to-day activities. But of course, the big question is always asked, and here's a question that has come in: how do I avoid the inevitable hangover after the holidays? It's one thing to be inspired during the holidays, but another to be inspired once we enter the mundane, regular life. What practical suggestions are there for maintaining inspiration and not plateauing? How can I maintain the desire to grow and maintain a high and positive attitude even when we get back to our routines? So every year, of course, it has its own kfiyas, its own so-called schedule, because this is Hashanah Mubaris. It's a leap year. So Pesach comes out later in the Parsha, it's already in Sefer Vayikra, but everything's Hashgacha Pratis, as the Rebbe cites from the Shalah HaKadosh, that the Parsha, you can find hints and connections to the holidays. So what connection is there in Parsha Acharei, which is the Parsha that we read both Chitas-wise, both these weeks, and also this is the week of Acharei, to Pesach. So actually directly connected in the context of this issue. What is in Parsha Acharei? Acharei Mois Shnei Bnei Aaron, which is referring to that after the temple, the Beis Hamikdash, the Mishkan, was erected, was established on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, right? Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the month of Geula, which is the second year after of course, when the Eden left, after they left Egypt. So what happened Rosh Chodesh Nisan, meaning the next year after their redemption? So that's when the temple was finished. So the two sons of Aaron, in their ecstasy, as Chassidus and the Rebbe cites from the Eira Chaim HaKadosh, in their great ecstasy and yearning and joy and wanting to cleave and connect to the divine, because this is the first time that they had the Mishkan, the purpose of existence, the first time that it took place. As we know, Moshe Rabbeinu brought the Shekhinah back down to earth after it was concealed, after this eating from the tree of knowledge. So they appreciated it, ran into the Mishkan. However, being unprepared, and the different explanations given for it, there was a rotzei lacking the proper shuv. There was a yearning lacking the proper integration, a tension without the proper resolution. And therefore, Eish Zara, a foreign flame, an alien fire, consumed them. And Bikrevi HaKadosh, Moses consoles Aaron by saying, I thought it would be you and I when it said Bikrevi. Those that are close to me will sanctify me, God said. But indeed it was your children, Nadav and Avihu. And this becomes a classic theme in Chassidus, especially in different Maimon, especially the Maimon from Acharei, this Parsha, Tafresh Mem Tes from the Rebbe Rashab, on the dangers of Rotzei, of a great spiritual yearning, and not knowing how to ground it and concretize it and bring it back into action. So then, 2 chapters later, Acharei Meiz Shnei Bnei Aaron, after that comes step 2, once we've heard what happened to the children of Aaron. Now we're told, B'zeis Yovei Aaron, now I will teach you the secret and the method how to enter the Holy of Holies and not be consumed by it. So in essence, this Parsha provides us with one of the most important lessons in life, including how one deals with inspiration and after the inspiration. Now, firstly, we hope that everybody had an inspiration. But let's assume that every Jew did have some type of awakening and some type of deeper experience on Pesach. So the question is, how do you maintain it? How do you reconnect it to life, and not just as a form, that it's not just an experience in a form of escapism? That's exactly what the whole point of this chapter is about. The Acharei, Meish, Aaron, after they died, in the way they died, in a very sacred way, but nevertheless it was not the kavanah, not the purpose. Now I teach you how to bring Kodesh Kadosh and bring the Holy of Holies, which of course on a personal level means that we all have a certain state of Holy of Holies, and at times that we may expire in a form of transcendence, in a form of ecstasy, in a form of some type of joy and inspiration. The real challenge is not the inspiration, but the challenge is how do you maintain it and how do you re-enter and bring it back into our lives. And the basic nukud, the basic point is, as Chassidus explains, that it comes down to that it's not about you, it's not about me, it's about the purpose. When a person becomes so consumed with something that excites them and they're passionate about it, even if it's a holy thing, if it becomes too much about you, then you can get consumed by it. However, if that passion and that excitement is connected to the purpose, to the cause, then you can channel it into the cause, because the cause is not about you and your experience, but what you do with this type of, he said, with this type of awakening. So 40 years ago, Pesach was Tovshin Lamed Vov, and 40 years is always a certain type of period, and it was also a Shana Mubaris, it was also a leap year, and happened to also be a year of an election, the presidential election, every 4 years. So it was 1976. As it is now, we're talking 2016, 40 years later. So 10 elections have transpired since then, 10 times 4. So in the Sichos of Pesach and after Pesach, the Shabbos after Pesach, and Yud Aleph Nisan, which was before Pesach, the Rebbe's birthday that year, interesting thing, the Rebbe said you can learn lessons from everything in life. One of the lessons we learn is from the election. We call someone running for president. Why the word running? You could say walking or being appointed or some other, running for president. And the Rebbe said, because running teaches us the concept that when you want something, and you want something that is good, you should run for it. Rotz l'dvar mitzvah, you run. It demonstrates the passion, excitement. When we're excited about something, we run toward it, both physically and also figuratively. And that was one lesson the Rebbe learned in Yud Aleph Nisan. So, and the Pesach, the theme that year in Tavshin Lamed Vov was about dilug and kfitza. That Pesach comes from the word Pesach, to pass over, to jump over. And there's two types of jumping, dilug and kfitza, one with one leg. When you run, you can jump with one leg, or you can jump with two legs, which is even faster, even a bigger bolt, so to speak, a bigger jump. And the Rebbe was talking about it in the context of how we grow in life. Recently I saw a note from the Rebbe, which I'll show you as well. Here's the actual handwriting of the Rebbe. If you can read it, but I'll read it for you. This was writing to someone who asked the Rebbe about how to grow. And here's what I'll get back to in a moment, the post-Pesach, Acharei, and including the connection to Shabbas Mevarchim Iyar, as I'll discuss in a moment. So the Rebbe writes that there are many ways to progress in life. One is be'efen da'amida al asar, which means to just stand in the place, the status quo, to stand by without any movement. La mitose shel dover. Then there's number 2 is halicha, which is to walk. Next is ritza, is to run. Then the Rebbe writes fliyan ba'aviron, to fly in a plane. Shel ha'achim right. He actually uses the Wright brothers. She b'meya ha'ovra, meaning in the past century, the previous century, and he underlines the previous century 3 times, they already taught us, they already invented the plane to fly in Aviron. Oy kenog ata beraket, question mark. In other words, the Rebbe is challenging and saying, so how are you going to move? You could just stand. I think the mitose shel dover, I would guess, meaning that you're maintaining the position in a true, consistent and way with integrity. I assume that's what it means. Maybe not. Halicha means to walk. Ritza, to run and to fly. And flying was already something invented last century. Oh, you're going to do it as is customary today with a rocket. You see here, in essence, the whole leadership of the Rebbe. There was never sufficient to just, of course, not to stand in the same position, to maintain the position, to walk, to run, but literally to fly as fast as possible and grow as fast as possible in any given way. So in that sikh in the Shabbos after Acharei Pesach, the Rebbe was saying the same theme that we can apply to today. That Pesach is the theme of going beyond your limitations. And how do you maintain that? As the Alter Rebbe says, he didn't put Chasal Siddur Pesach in the Haggadah because Pesach continues on. The power to be able to go out of our limitations continues on. And the days after Pesach give us the power to continue to grow in that particular fashion. So in a practical way, it's simply this. We can just rely on whatever happened on Pesach, or we can take upon ourselves resolutions. Right now, after Pesach, take that inspiration into resolutions that go, whether it's running, jumping, 2 legs, or all the way with like a racket, resolutions, whether it's in adding a shir and learning Torah, committing to do something new in the area of helping others, in Mitzrayim. There's many ways that we can apply the concept of Pesach as we go further. And ultimately, what happened with Nadav and Avihu was that they absorbed that divine passion that they experienced, but no one else did. That was the problem. The challenge is, how do you take it, is by taking the passion and turning it into a resolution that's equivalent and commensurate with the idea of Pesach, which is transcendence. And that comes down to not just as a spiritual state, but practically speaking. In the year Tov Shel Amud Vav, the Rebbe instituted then the Shnas HaChinuch, and the year of Chinuch and education. Obviously, that's an appropriate thing that can be applicable now. But at the end of the day, each of us has to find our way of applying the Pesach experience and translating. That's the way we maintain inspiration. You don't maintain inspiration just by trying to hold on to the spark. It's by doing things that are infused by that spark, and that doing it is what is called shuv, that grounds it. In the language of Chassidus, Oros in Bikeilim. So the Oros is the passion, the Bikeilim is the container, is the method, and the actions and the actualization of that inspiration of the energy. And Oros Bikeilim, Ratzeh and Shuv is the key to all types of growth. Now finally, let's add one more thing, since it's also Shabbas Mevarchim Iyar. Shabbas Mevarchim Iyar, as the Rebbe spoke then 40 years ago, Tov Shel Amud Vav, in the Shabbos Acharei after Pesach, he spoke about Iyar Rosh Tevis, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Rachel, and of course is the month when we count the Omer. Now, in Chassidus, what is the idea of the Sefiras Haomer? The idea is basically that if you think of Nisan, Iyar, and Sivan as the first 3 months, so the Chodesh Harishon is Chesed, then comes the next month is Gvura, and the third month, Tiferes, Matan Torah, is the month of Sivan. What does that mean in the language of human behavior? Mamaydal Lamata is Chesed. God bestowed upon us, took us out. It was a revelation from above. The Jews did not make any effort toward this. This was finally, God said, time has come. He's taken the Jews out of Egypt. But in essence, as Chassidus brings, Chesed and Rayich, and the Kinai Yisrael V'Ohevehu, that the Jews were still in a state of infancy, essentially, from their own spiritual growth. They had suffered greatly, but they had not yet developed their expressed their own effort. So the next month of Iyar is Gvura Malmata Lamayla, which is the counting. They start to count. The second day of Pesach, the counting, as the Ran says in the end of Pesachim, the counting was a form of yearning, gaguyim. Like when you know there's a countdown, you know that you're going to experience something very valuable, very precious, you count toward it. But the counting, as we explained, is not just they counted the days, it was also they refined themselves. With each of the 49 days of the Omer, from the second day of Pesach, concluding with the 49th, the day before Shavuos, is a day that represents, like we say in Sefiras Haomer, we'll talk about this a little more at the end of this episode, the Chassidus Question of the week, the day of refining Chesed Shebechesed, the love within love, the Gvura, the discipline within love, to the point all the way till Malchus Sheba Malchus, which then leads into the Yom HaChamishim, the 50th day, the 50th gate, which is Shavuos, Sefiras, which combines Mamayla Lamata, the Asusa de Le'ela, which is an awakening from above, with Asusa Latata Iyar, which is the awakening from below, meaning our effort, our initiative, and then you have the combination of both by Matan Teira. Hashem Vayered Hashem al Harsini, God descends, and Moshe Ole Alahar, and Moses goes up. So it's a joining of human initiative and divine initiative, all in one. So then now, as we enter the Shabbas Mevarchim Iyar, even though we began counting the Omer already, but this month, the whole month, is all about counting them. Every day is another count. This month is us growing and taking that inspiration that Pesach gives us from above, the Seder, the blessings, the everything that the holiday gives us, and now making it our own, owning it, turning it into an integrated experience, which ends up coming down to human refinement, refining your behavior. It really is simple as that. That's when you see, that's the real litmus test, the real Evan Abeichen that shows that whatever inspiration really affected you. Inspiration that comes and goes, or is just something completely only about you and no one else, means it hasn't really been internalized. Internalization means that it has affected your personality. So we all know that the challenge that Pesach comes and goes like all holidays, and something really changed. Has something really changed? And that's up to us. That you should do something different in your attitudes, in your Ahavas Yisrael, in your kindness, in your sensitivity, in your initiative in helping another. And only you can control that. That which was given to us is given to us as a gift, which is the holiday, Pesach. But now comes the next step, which is the month of Iyar. As we bless the month of Iyar at the end of Nisan, is a month where we are given the opportunity to refine ourselves and do whatever we can to take and internalize that inspiration. Then Pesach lives on in its truest way possible. Okay. With that, let's go into a few questions, some of them related, some not directly related, but we continue the journey of MyLife Chassidus Applied. And here's an opportunity to thank, again, those of you that ask the questions, those of you that send in all your comments. I appreciate it deeply, and I think it's a joint effort, a partnership. And you can do that anonymously, totally in a forum we've created at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. There you can also watch all the previous episodes. They're time-stamped. You can download them, iTunes, and to your iPads, or in any way possible. You can listen to them in a drive or any other way. We've made it all available, and it's easy to follow the instructions to do that on our website, meaningfullife.com. Again, MyLife/MyLife. meaningfullife.com/MyLife. And, okay, so we've covered the holiday high. Let us go to a question which is connected to Pesach, but also really a universal question, an all-year-round question. And that is the issue of questions, which is skepticism. Does Judaism encourage or discourage questions? And more specifically, we came from Pesach, the two Seders we had outside of Eretz Yisrael, and the question, they're so much surrounded. Magid begins, Kan ha-ben shoel, the child asks the questions, 4 questions. So someone writes the following question. After sitting at the Seder, I realized that I have a 5th question. Why are 2 of the 4 questions we encourage children to ask not answered in Haggadah? Isn't it strange that the entire Seder is fashioned to engage children and provoke their curiosity, yet not all their questions are answered? Aren't we leaving a lot of children confused? Specifically, let's spell it out. That the 4 questions, the first one about dipping, the order that we say that in Chabad Minig, to say it first, the dipping, Madbilin, Shtei Pamim, right? So there, the question asks, why do we dip? Why is this night different than all others? And why do we dip twice? Karpus and Zalsvar, and Mara and Charesis. There's nowhere in the Haggadah you find an explicit answer, or even a alluded to answer. The next question about matzah, why we eat matzah, is specifically answered. Matzah zu, and the Haggadah dedicates a paragraph where it discusses why we eat matzah. Mora, the third question, is answered. Why we eat mora in the same, right after matzah comes mora, Pesach, matzah, mora, that order. The end of Magid, close to the end of Magid. And then comes the 4th question, why do we recline? Mesubim. And that too is not anywhere explicitly or non-explicitly answered in the Haggadah. So it's an excellent question. I have to say, I had this question myself a number of years ago, and I asked it at the table. And some cynic, some smart aleck said, well, by the time the Seder is over, the children are asleep, so they don't even know that we didn't answer the question. But Chacham, what happens then? They grow a little older and they find out that these questions were asked and they were never answered. So we're just pushing over the inevitable. It doesn't necessarily help. What makes it even more interesting, the circular logic here, is that the reason we actually dip is to provoke the children in order to ask questions. So the reason for that shinui, that change, why we dip the carpets in salt water and mortar in chareses, is in order to provoke that they ask the question. So that's the answer. Mesubim is connected to freedom, but they're not in the Haggadah. So I've never seen an answer to this question, why they're not answered specifically in the Haggadah. But here's a thought that came to me. It resonates at least with me. If there is indeed a source, please, by all means, I'd like to hear from anyone who has something to say on this matter that you find published. But here's an interesting thing with a little gishmak footnote afterwards, and that is this. Pesach is ma'acherasenu, it's freedom, time of freedom. What is the greatest freedom of all? The greatest freedom of all is the right that every human being has to ask a question and to ask questions. Lo yahabaishan lamad. The embarrassed one, the one whose shame will not learn. The whole Talmud is based on question answer. The whole Haggadah, the Magid, Shailo v'tshuva, question and answer. To drive the point home, let's look at history. What was me'evei techakmeni? Our enemies make us wise. What was the first thing that every fascist, every totalitarian, every the dictator does? He immediately tries to stop any type of challenge to his authority. He wants to control the airwaves, to control the newspapers, to control that people should not ask questions, should not have, to not know that there are alternatives. Why? Because power and control is contingent on not letting people ask questions. And when they ask questions, they're imprisoned or even worse. And you see this in history. So when we celebrate Pesach, that's why you find in many of these regimes, the first thing is, what do they establish? A Bureau of Truth and Information. Rest assured, as soon as anyone establishes a Bureau of Truth and Information, it's neither true nor information. Why do you need them to tell you what's true and information? Because they want to control. Pesach in stark contrast, it's man cheresenu, that we have the right to ask. And we encourage our children to ask. And we provoke them to ask. Because we want to teach them this is the way that Torah is studied. It's not a contradiction to Kabbalah Sale, Nasiv and Nishma, that first we'll do and then we'll understand. It's on the contrary, it complements it. There's the element of commitment, absolutely. But the commitment is real when you own it and it's internalized, and you internalize it by asking questions. Now, there's unhealthy skepticism, people who ask questions just to ask questions, just to defend their position and to justify their choices. They're not interested in answers. But then there's questions that come from a sincere place that allows a person to grow and internalize it. You say something, the teacher says something, the student says, I don't fully understand. Sometimes there's a contradiction. I could say on a personal level, when we worked in the Sichos, the Rebbe not only answered questions, he encouraged, he often provoked, he even said a number of times that he says something in order to provoke a question. This is how you grow, this is how the mind grows. And that's why Talmud Bavli is all based on questions and answers. So the main focus is the questions. Yes, we give you two answers, but the question is more important than the answer. The right to ask the question, which explains the context of that idea of asking questions. Now, Shailas Chacham Chatzei Tshuva, the question of a wise person is half an answer. So just by asking the question, you're already halfway to the answer. And then you'll finally find the answer. You tell the children, some answers will tell you directly, others, why don't you go ahead and discover it? The answer to the other two questions. The footnote I'd like to add is that I recently saw a sikha from the Frierdiker Rebbe in the early years, I don't have it in front of me in the page, where he brings that in Tafresh Nun Daled, the Rebbe Rashab said a mimer called Ki Yishalcha Bincha, a Pesach mimer, which of course is the basis of this idea, when your child will ask. Then, you shall answer. But that there's an idea, there's an inyan Ki Yishalcha Bincha, and he says something interesting. He says that the question that Rebbe Rashab asked in that mimer, he didn't answer. He doesn't explain why. Perhaps He's alluding to the fact that the idea of ki yishalcha bincha is an objective and an end in its own. The idea of asking, and that's why he didn't answer a question that he asked in that Maimon Tafresh Nun Dalet. You can look it up through the Maftechas. I believe it's in maybe Pei Gimel, Pei Dalet. I may be wrong, but it's definitely in the Peis. The Frierdiker Rebbe mentions this ki yishalcha bincha Tafresh Nun Dalet. So coming out to question 2, following up, does Judaism invite challenges and skepticism, or does it mandate mere acceptance? Am I being a heretic by questioning? Am I being a coward by submitting? And if we're to blend the two, where's the balance between challenging and accepting? So very clearly, as I just stated, Judaism wants both. It wants us to accept, but it wants us to internalize. And internalize means challenging, questioning, and finding answers, and that actually will deepen the relationship and the commitment to whatever it is that you've accepted. Never forget the Sikh in Tovshim Mem Ches. It was the second Perek of Pirkei Avos that I was explaining. So I believe it was Parshas, maybe Sazriya, Mitzayra that year, Mem Ches. And the Rebbe asked a famous question, which is a fundamental question, I should say, that when you learn Perek Beis of Pirkei Avos, it begins, Rebbe Eimer, Ezu derech sheyavel lemina adam. What should be the path that a person should choose for themselves? Sheyavel, that person should discern, should choose for themselves. And he continues to choose a path that's tiferes lo, tiferes le'esel, something that's beautiful for him and for those around. And the Rebbe asked, I remember the Rebbe raising his voice in that type of like complete wonder and amazement. What kind of question and answer is that? What do you mean ezu derech? The whole Torah comes and tells us what derech to choose, which is the derech Hashem, the derech of Torah and mitzvahs. Then mitzvah v'Torah, the derech Chaim techachas Musa. We have a Torah for that reason. What's the Mishnah suddenly asking? Which path should a person choose? And then what the answer should have at least said, okay, go to Shulchan Aruch, go study Torah. No. What's beautiful? Which of course undermines the whole basis. What do you mean what's beautiful? What one person finds beautiful, another person may not find beautiful. Is that a subjective answer? And the Rebbe's answer, in a simple, brilliant way, this is Perek Beis of Pirkei Avos. When you learn Perek Beis, it means you've already learned Perek Aleph. And Torah depends and relies that you've already learned Perek Aleph. What's Perek Aleph? Moshe Kibel Torah Misina Mesar Yeshua. So you've already learned that the concept of Nasiv and Ishma, which is that we received Torah from Sinai. Moshe Kibel Torah Mis Sinai. The question asked, he didn't receive it from Sinai, from the mountain. He received it from God. But he received from Sinai the message that it's Mochich Mochol Torah, it's the lowest of all mountains, the humility that's necessary. The bottom line is Moshe Kibel Torah and Masar Yeshua. So we've learned the idea of receiving from a teacher and accepting and committing with the Kabbalah sale. Now comes Perek Beis, step 2. You've learned Nasa, now comes Nasa V'nishma. So someone will say, well, it says V'nishma, where's the Nasa? Well, we already had the V'nasa, we already have established the foundation. Now comes internalization. The Torah is not, the Mishnah is not coming to say instead of Kabbalah. So it's saying in addition to now that you already have that commitment, now comes step number 2. What's the path that a person should choose? That it choose that in a way that is internalized. In Darkei Nimus, which means in morality and ethics and the etiquette of human beings, is something that's beautiful. That the Torah mitzvahs should be beautiful, should be refined, should permeate a person on a personal level. And the Rebbe then emphasizes, Rebbe Eimer, the Rebbe Zokt. The Rebbe. You can look up the Sikh, it's printed in Sefiras Haomer, Tafshin Mem Ches. So the bottom line is they can absolutely be reconciled. It's not a contradiction. Kabbalah Seil, acceptance in Yiddishkeit, is not some type of childhood, a juvenile, immature type of, okay, whatever you say, I'm going to do. It's a lot deeper than that. It's saying, I totally trust you. Because, of course, the obvious question, why did the Jews, you saw a Jew's going to sign a contract before reading it? The Eibishter gives them the Torah and say, Nasa v'nishma. And the Roman Apikadis asks in the Gemara in Shabbos, what is that kind of pizaiza? What kind of behavior is that? That you just rush to commit to something without looking at it? The answer is very obvious. The Jews had already a relationship with God. You could say they dated God, quote unquote, for many years. Avram, Yitzchak, Yankov, 7 generations. So they already had a relationship with Eibishter. How long can you stand on the fence? Now that the Eibishter comes and says, now that I took you out of Egypt, now that we're consummating our relationship, are you ready to accept? And the answer is immediately yes. Because we know you. It's not the first time that they had a communication. They had parents and grandparents that paid the heavy prices. Then comes step 2, we'll internalize it. And even then the Gemara says that by Matan Torah it was still somewhat imposed upon them. And that's when Medoy Rabba L'Raisa, and it comes Purim, Kimu V'Kibla Yehudim, Purim, they really accepted it completely on their own, something like Iyar compared to Nisan type of idea. But the bottom line is that there's a combination and integration of 2 elements here. And anything healthy in life will have the element I commit, but number 2, I don't just want your commitment. I want I want your heart and soul. I want your total passion. And that can only be if you internalize it and you ask questions. You challenge, and you really make it yours, not just you're doing someone else a favor. Kabbalah alone can have that element. It's not about me. I'm just do whatever, like an Eved. The Eibishter wants a lot more than that. He wants a complete internalization. Moving on to a completely different discussion, because it's a question that came in, so I'd like to address it. Just make sure I'm going here in the right order. And that is it possible that my child doesn't need friends? Okay. So the question goes like this. I watched today's episode on making friends. This is referring to episodes 49 and 50. So it's a question that came in a while back, but we never covered it. And that was very helpful to me, that episode. But I'm a single mom whose teenage girls seem to have challenges with making friends outside of our immediate family. They're close in age and rely on each other as a threesome. Do you have any suggestions as to how I can give over your ideas if they may not be interested in watching your classes? Question number 2 in this same vein. My child, although friendly and personable, seems to prefer to be on her own. She doesn't want to hang out with friends in her spare time like most teenagers. She seems to like her solitude. Is this indicative of a potential issue? Is it possible that she generally doesn't need friends like others do? How can I determine? And how do I encourage her to go out and socialize? Okay, here, as in all situations, being I don't know the people involved. The first question, you write, you're a single mom, so I'm sure that has to be taken in consideration. Where's their father? How the divorce affected them? Or if it's not a divorce, a death, I apologize, I don't know what the situation is. Or whatever is the reason that there's a single mom. And that may have an impact in their own sense of security and their sense of going out and having the courage to socialize with others. So I'm saying that only as an example. There are many factors that can be involved in it. I would say the following. To someone who's avoiding friends, yes, there are some people who are more introvert and there are others that are more extrovert. But generally speaking, every human being needs companionship. And to say extreme non-companionship is probably something to look at here. To look at what the reasons for it. And it could be many reasons which I can't enumerate here because I don't know the situation. So I would definitely err on the side of caution saying, yes, there's some issue. And to both questioners here and anyone else with this, friends is something that's necessary. It's necessary for our own experimentation in life, so to speak. It's necessary as feedback, necessary of learning relationships, especially preparing us to be able to have a more complete relationship in marriage. So it's in so many levels that friends are part of a person's life. The Mishnah says, Aseh lecha rav, knei lecha chaver. Appoint for yourself, designate a rav, a mentor, a teacher, an authority, but knei, acquire a friend. So Adam is medini, a person is by nature a social creature, and we therefore need to have friends. So I would not dismiss it as something, they may just be this way. I would definitely look at it, and I would not do it with a sledgehammer. I wouldn't do it in any type of aggressive way, in a kind way, maybe a professional that could help. But you need to get to the bottom of why your child is avoiding and not being connected with others. You want to nip it in the bud. You don't want it to wait and to become into a whole monster, where a person becomes, and that becomes their nature, second nature, and they just don't go out. They just don't connect with others. It's very vital in human connections. You see it even with little children as they play with each other, to have that interaction, that have that give and take, sometimes even struggles. Sometimes, those little fights that children may have, as long as obviously it's in a healthy fashion. So I think it's critical to look at it that way. I don't think, I wouldn't oppose listening to my classes per se. I think it's more important that they find someone they can talk to, and school, maybe talk to the teachers in school and others, what they observe. Do they see the children playing with other children, or they're always staying in a corner? And you really want to get to the bottom of it. And sometimes it can be maybe just a personality thing, and they just need a little encouragement and find the right type of friends. Maybe there's something bigger going on that's causing them to be either ashamed or afraid, but due to bullying or other experiences that may have caused them to retreat and avoid interaction and repressing their emotional feelings. Often the result of a repressed childhood, which means if childhood did not have the security and the confidence to be able to express themselves, will lead to different forms of so-called retreat behavior, where a child will avoid friends and avoid, at least on any deeper level, maybe on a superficial level. So something definitely must be addressed. Context of Pesach and where we're coming from, Pesach is about sitting together with family, friends, and like so many other holidays where children come together and the children share with each other. So this is part of the healthy exuberance and the healthy environment necessary for children to grow. And your teenage children should definitely not be deprived of this. Anyway, I could help further if I was able to hear more information, or then I can direct you or give you more response. But I don't know more, so I can't really say much more than what I've said right now. Okay, next question. Next question is, when, if ever, is a woman supposed to be a financial provider for her home? Can it be that God wants me, though I am a woman, to take the role of provider and not expect my husband to earn a living? It's a rather longer question that was asked. I'll try to just read excerpts of it, but the gist of it is the summary. My husband isn't really fulfilling his role of financial provider. He's waiting for a talent of his to kick off and start bringing in income. Meanwhile, we're struggling financially. Am I, the woman of the home, supposed to jump in and be the financial provider? I'll just read, as I said, a few select sentences from paragraphs from this longer letter. For years we have gone around and around the same issue. My husband believes the only way he can earn a living is through music, and we have not been able to earn a livelihood, but instead have spent more money than we make on this endeavor. And whenever I'm able to, I find a way to make it work. I work too many hours and exhaust myself. And eventually I get angry, depressed, and at times rant, rave, feel suicidal, totally lose control. I want to be supportive and loving, but it always lands me in the same place when I overdo and can't keep it together anymore. Now my father is sending me money, and I feel incredibly guilty for not making it on my own and for choosing a spouse that resulted in my father having to continue to support me financially as an adult. We have been to therapists, rabbis, and at the end of the day, it all comes back to me. That I have to be the one to set boundaries that I can't seem to set. I love him, and oh, by the way, when I push too hard, it results in him being abusive to me, calling me names like moron and saying that I don't want to repeat what it says here, and don't know what I'm talking about. Then things blow up and I threaten divorce, and then things come down and around we go again. I don't know if I'm supposed to be stronger and insist, get a job or leave by such and such date or such and such amount of money, or if I should just face up to the fact that he will never earn a living except through music, and sometimes money will come in and sometimes it won't. God seems to want me to be the provider in this relationship, but then I feel as if I have to provide whatever it is he wants, the next keyboard, the next piece of software. If we moved out of the neighborhood we lived in, perhaps I could make ends meet, but I feel immobilized and afraid to move away from my community and our rabbi. That's the gist of it, and I will respond, obviously, as best to my ability. Just want to conclude what she writes at the end, how it's affected their marriage, the breakdown of the marriage, breakdown of intimacy. And it feels wrong to put his music above earning a living to be self-sufficient and a productive part of the community. Thanks for your time and for your website. I've read your emails before, but today I went to your website and listened to your talk on stinginess. And I know I have a stingy part of myself that comes from fear of being destitute, and that fear is often unreasonable, especially since my dad is well off and able to assist. But I feel that we throw money at a music career, and is that stingy not too? Or is it being reasonable and responsible to say enough, time to get a real life? Okay. Again, when I'm not hearing all the circumstances and hearing from your husband, it's difficult to give a full, complete answer. So I'll begin from scratch. There's a mitzvah in the Torah, Sedek Susave Nosa Leisigra. A husband has a responsibility to provide clothing, food, and basic necessities to his wife and family. So let's start with pashtus, called the poshet MyLife. Let's start simple. Why is your husband not doing that? Now, I'm not suggesting it has to be expressed in an aggressive manner, but that's the first question one has to ask. Why? Is he incapable? Is he distorting his connection to his music and talent and not being realistic? Is he in the back of his mind relying that your father will help? Is he lazy? I mean, all these questions are vital. Or is he incapacitated? Is he incapable? So I don't want to assume that anyone's incapable. I want to assume that he's a healthy human being, God blessed him, and maybe what he needs is a serious mashpia to tell him what he needs to do. It's hard for a wife to be the mashpia, so I would not try to stay away from ultimatums, even if it may be deserving, and try to encourage that type of accountability. So where I would make an ultimatum is say, listen, we have to do something. I think you may be what they call a codependent here, or even a enabler, which is like, so to speak, creating a situation, allowing him to be this way. And I think it's not healthy for a role model for children, not healthy for the home and family, and not healthy for you. So before we get to a woman being a provider, I think the first thing is, why is this man not doing what he has to be doing? There are many people doing jobs that don't fit perfectly their talent. There are many people who have a talent music and are doing everything they can to bring in enough money. And they're not, they find ways to supplement it. That to me is above all the issue that must be addressed. Then there's another discussion. Should a woman, if become a provider, should she become a breadwinner and so on? Well, there are circumstances, generally not, because it's the man's responsibility. The woman's responsibility is to take care of the home and the children. We also talk always about how the Rebbe wants men and women both to be fulfilled, independently also family in their work in shlichus, whether it's working some type of cause, some type of charity, some volunteer work and so on, teaching, etc. But bottom line is the main primary breadwinning responsibility is the husband. Now, should it turn out that your husband is incapable, medically or for other reasons, it's another story. Then the question is, since he can't, what should be your role and how to approach it? But I don't want to make that assumption. Should you supplement? Yes, there are husbands and wives. The husbands bring the main money, and women work and they bring in supplemental income, which helps, of course, the family. It makes it easier and so on. But what you're describing is a husband that's not really living up to his obligation. And that's the bottom line. Torah obligation, the Chassidic obligation, and so on. So does he have a mashpia? Does he have a rav? Does he listen to people? Is he obstinate? Is he just always right? All these questions I have no answers to because I don't know. So this is the direction I would take in approaching this issue. Find someone that he trusts, encourage him within a kind way, but be firm, and above all, something has to be done. If the shift, cannot let this just linger. And okay, it's fine. It seems that it's lingering for many years, which of course is going to make it very difficult to get out of the inertia of the status quo and the trap of just continue to coast this way and say, listen, we managed till now, we'll manage on. But also for his own dignity and his own self-esteem and self-sense of pride, I think it's critical that a man does what he has to do to provide. Be creative, be original, find new friends, network, and you find a way. Okay. I need help prioritizing on Shabbas Mevarchim. Being this next Shabbos is Shabbas Mevarchim, here's a question that came in connected to Shabbos Mevarchim. Thank you for your wonderful ongoing series, a writer writes. I've always found Shabbos Mevarchim very tough. The tight schedule hardly allows time for Tehillim, davening, and learning Chassidus before Tefillah, before davening. Please advise what is proper. Should one learn an hour after Tehillim and skip Tefillah B'tzibur? Remember, Shabbos Mevarchim, the Friedrich Rebbe Institute to say the full book of Tehillim, and they say it in shul is 8 o'clock in the morning before davening. So he's asking, should one learn an hour after Tehillim and skip davening with a minyan? Or is it better to skip Chassidus and just say Tehillim and then daven right away? Also, Shabbos Mevarchim is meant to be meant to be a day of his fathers, a Fabring, right? The Friedrich Rebbe Institute, that the Rebbe said a number of times, he would Fabring Shabbos Mevarchim because the Friedrich Rebbe told him to Fabring. So it's a day of his fathers. How do I fit all this into a few hours? If I do things proper and say Tehillim, Psalms, Learn an hour of Chassidus. I either miss the shul farbrengen, or if I do find a farbrengen, come home too late and don't have enough time with my family before I need to go back for mincha. Shabbas Mevarchim leaves me often frustrated. Any advice of how to fit everything in, and if impossible, what is most important and what to cut? Okay, I'm sure the same question can be asked about many other activities. The Rebbe institutes learning the Rambam 3 chapters a day, or at least 1 chapter a day, the Sefiras Mitzvahs, there's chitas. There's a lot of obligations that we have, and I think this question is really a broad question about everything. But I'll address it with the Shabbos Mevarchim. So let's keep in mind that the Torah does not ask us to do things that are impossible, to climb into the heavens. That's not possible. Everything asked of us means we're capable of it. If the Rabbeim instituted saying Tehillim Shabbos Mevarchim, learning Chassidus is possible. It doesn't have to necessarily be the way exactly you defined it, an hour. Saying Tehillim is one thing. Then you can learn Chassidus for 5 minutes too. You can learn for 10 minutes. So I think it's about firstly getting rid of the pressure on you that you have to do everything all the time and the fullest possible way. Let's just take a little more lighter approach to it, which is I'm going to do the best I can. Say Tehillim. Some people finish Tehillim later because either they didn't finish, they're saying it slowly, and it's already coming time to daven. So I would say let's go in the order to say the Tehillim, say as much as you can in the morning. Get up earlier if you can. No, don't do it as a whole pressure thing. Then sit and learn Chassidus, yes, a few minutes, if it doesn't have to be an hour. And when the minyan starts, daven with the tzibur. After the davening, there's a farbrengen. Sit down farbrengen. You could sit for a half hour in a farbrengen. And then go home, depending on the circumstances. If your wife and family are not home for whatever reason, spend more time in farbrengen. Finish saying Tehillim later. I think it's important to just not be... The tone I hear here is a type of I'm almost frantic. I'm not getting it all done. These are gifts that are given to us to do. It's not meant to drive us crazy. It's meant to help us grow. And say Tehillim, say it slowly, and say something slow. You could say other things faster. I think you just have to find your regimen that's balanced, that doesn't create any type of kinetic energy where you're expending so much tension over what to do next that's not really even being done in the right spirit altogether. These are blessings Shabbos is given to us. It's a gift. We have hours in the day, and just find ways to do it and find ways to balance. You want to include, you could say, if you have children, homework with your children, or learning something on Shabbos with your children. There's there's family time. You could add a whole more list of things, and it really seems impossible. But you'll find busy people are the people you want to get something done, you give it to someone that's busy. You just have to not approach it in an overwhelming way, but simply as, okay, let me schedule my day. And I'll look at the clock. When it comes this and this time, this is what I move on to. If you haven't finished the Tehillim, you finish it later, etc., etc. And I think that's a general approach in general in life, not to become overwhelmed by obligations. Because then you don't do the obligations properly. You want to do it with a simcha, with a joy, with a good heart, with excitement. Then the day, if it becomes so overwhelming, ultimately people are going to stop doing it. Because, I can't do it. I'm overwhelmed. And you know something? If for whatever reason something can be done, you don't have the time to learn the Chassidus that morning, or you can't stay by the farbrengen because it's something you have to do, so be it. There's nothing to feel guilty about. It would be good to have a mashpia, good to have a mentor that you can talk this through and determine how to prioritize. Okay. There's a little follow-up. We'll do a little follow-up, and then we will the Chassidus question, and then we'll do the essays. These are the new essays of this year, 2016, Tafshin Ayin Vav. But let's first do a follow-up, first of all, a Rebbe follow-up. Last episode, which was 2 weeks ago, was a special Yud Aleph Nisan edition. So I wanted to just continue where some points that I didn't fully cover. And so I spoke then about the question that was asked: Does a Rebbe do everything based on Ruach HaKodesh and his ability to see in a higher way than anyone, or also Api Seichel? So I received from a few people comments on this, and I want to address that. So I spoke then that a Rebbe has two components. A Rebbe, of course, is a human being of flesh and blood, but he's endowed with the power, obviously, that is a neshama klolis and the strength of a Rebbe. So the Rebbe was once asked by students, college students, and asked them, when you answer questions, do you answer it with Ruach HaKodesh? Ruach HaKodesh literally means the Holy Spirit, but it means a sense of what a tzaddik, not a complete prophecy like a novi. Ruach HaKodesh, however, is still something that normal human beings do not have. Or do you answer it with seichel, with your intelligence? And the Rebbe's response was very interesting. The Rebbe said that he does everything possible to use his seichel to answer the question, and if seichel is not sufficient, then he'll rely on other means. Which of course makes sense. And you find also in Nigla, in Torah, the concept that Moshe was a novi, but he was also a chacham. So when he said things, did he say it as a prophet? Did he say it as a wise person? So there are things that he said as a chacham, which is even odif, it can be even better than, greater than a novi. Things he said as a prophecy. The Rogatchover talks about this in a number of places. Torah itself, there's a wisdom in Torah, and then there's an element of holiness and Dvar Hashem in Torah. They don't have to be a contradiction, because the Dvar Hashem, which is the divine element, the divine truth, can manifest, as Chassidus explains, in Chochmah, in wisdom. There's the famous story with Rabbi Hillel Paritcher and the Tzemach Tzedek. They were sitting at a table. The Tzemach Tzedek had said a Maimer Chassidus. And then at the table they were arguing and discussing what the Pshat in the Maimer is. And Rabbi Hillel disagreed with the Tzemach Tzedek in Pshat, in the meaning of the Maimer. So Chassidim said to him, the Rebbe is explaining, the Rebbe is the one that said the Maimer, Tzemach Tzedek. You're arguing with him about Pshat in the Maimer, when he's the one that said the Maimer, and he's saying Pshat now. So he said, when the Rebbe said the Maimer is Kinsinose Messinai, it was like given at Sinai and Dvar Hashem. But now we're talking on Piseichel, how we understand it. As the famous story with the Rebbe Rashab and Rabbi Chaim Ber, with the issue of Imre Bina, they wanted to know via Seichel Anushi Ken Derech Krich. So and that's why you find that Rabbeim struggled also. The Alter Rebbe didn't just write down, he said he struggled to write a Vov. Why is he struggling? Why isn't it just a channel of Ruach HaKodesh? Because it's an importance that the holiness, the power, the divine should manifest, should integrate, and should be channeled through the Kelim of Teva and Seichel and so on and so forth. What was additionally pointed out to me was the following, that there's in one of the meals by the Suda of Shavuos Tavshin Chavtes, with Reb Zalman Yaffa from Manchester and the Rebbe, an exchange, and he asked the Rebbe, it says in the Pasuk in Yisrei Yutes Ches, it says, V'yanu kolam yagdav v'yemri kol asher dibur Hashem nasa v'nishma, v'yoshev Moshe divrei amel Hashem. And Moshe repeated and told the Eibishter what the Jews said. So the question is asked, he asked the question, why did you have to tell the Eibishter? The Eibishter doesn't know. So Rashi, the Rebbe says, Rashi bavarans it. Rashi says that though he knew, of course the Eibishter knew, but we learn from Moshe the importance of having to say anyway. And the Rebbe said then, and by the Sudi, you see, connected it also to our Rebbe, that even though Rebbe may know, we still have a reason to report to the Rebbe. Why do you have to report to the Rebbe Aduch? Let the Rebbe have Ruach HaKodesh, and he knows what's happening. Because it's important to bring it into Dira Bitachon, into the levushim, the garments, and the containers of this world. Another thing he brought was a sikha from Pesach Sheni Tovshin Yud, actually connected to Sefiras Haomer, talking about the question, well, can the Rebbe make a mistake? That he brings there in the sikha, the Rebbe, this is again, I said, Pesach Sheni Tovshin Yud, where he says the following, that the Frierdiker Rebbe had a custom that in his siddur he would make a mark after the sfira of every night. He'd make a mark, like a check, that he counted that sfira. Even though for sure he didn't need eitzes, a Rebbe, that he would need eitzes, solutions to how, tricks of how to not forget. That's not Shach to Rebbe. And yet he made it, because there's an inyan in having it drawn down into our garments in this world. Which, as an aside, I should mention, which I'll mention again soon, but I should mention that we created a few years ago, but this year it's a complete upgrade, an app, a MyOmer app, which actually helps you mark the each day, and you can do it at any time zone. It's an excellent app that, of course, incorporates as well the book I wrote, The Spiritual Guide to Counting the Omer, how each day, with a meditation exercise and refining the midah of that day. So I'm saying that as an aside. Okay, so that's a follow-up There's more to speak about follow-up with the Rebbe. There were other questions, but time is limited. So I will now move to the Chassidus question of the week. And the other questions, the Rebbe questions, will continue in future weeks. As well as follow-up to the issue of Emunah and Bitachon. That one I will actually read, so we'll deal with that. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, and this I addressed, I believe, in episode 111. Thank you so much for your wonderful web farbrengens, if I may call them so. They're very inspiring and add much to my week. I have a follow-up thought about Bitachon. Often we don't know what's best for us. What may appear as best later turns out to be not so. For example, one may lose a job only to get a much better one. On a personal level, something I think of, when married to my first spouse, we experienced infertility. I used to daven to Hashem many times a day for children. It was only after we got divorced that I realized what a bracha it was that we weren't popping children out. Now that I'm happily married to a wonderful person, I realize what a bracha the infertility was. What is Bitachon? Is it really just realizing that what appears to be best may not be so? That Hashem with infinite wisdom sees way beyond what we can, and thus what He plans for us is really the best? Please note that I'm not saying that we shouldn't try and do everything in our power to create the results that we want. However, what I'm saying is that once we've done our best, maybe the Bitachon is trust that whatever happens is Hashem's plan and really for our best. Am I on target here? I would say you are on target. Yet Bitachon also has the element that I discussed then about the trach gut v'zayin gut, which means that when you're in a predicament, a situation which seems hopeless, al pi seichel, you have absolute trust that God can and will take you out of the situation. Now, after the fact, yes, whether the story with infertility or story with a job loss, after the fact, very many times something, maybe God chose not to do that for you, and your Bitachon is that the best thing will come out of it. But b'shas ma'aseh, infertility is not a blessing. So you have to do whatever is possible to try to have children. If after all that you've tried and you've done everything in your power, God says no, God doesn't want, there's an element of trust that God knows what's best for you. And yes, it could end up bringing to something better, as you've described. So I think it's important to distinguish that there's Bitachon before the fact and there's Bitachon after the fact. Before the fact, I mean Bitachon when the situation is a predicament, you trust absolutely that God can and will save you and give you what you need, whether it's parnasa, whether it's children, whether it's other things. And then there's after the fact that Bitachon, that whatever happened, even if it wasn't as you planned it, will lead to something better and good in your life. That's how I would phrase it. Okay. With that, let's go to the Chassidus question. Chassidus discusses the period of Sefiras Haomer as a time of birur hamidos, refining our emotions and character traits. Is this referring to the midos of the nefesh, of our nefesh alakis, the divine soul, or our nefesh abamis, the animal soul? Does it refer to our service ben adam lamokim, our service ben adam lamokim, meaning between man and God, or ben adam l'chaveda, between man and man? Can you explain in more practical terms how this can be applied? So absolutely. I just want to give a small introduction. I happened to do extensive research on this topic because when I did the book, which became a book, actually it didn't begin as a book, The Spiritual Guide to Counting the Omer, which, as I mentioned before, is now an app, free app, MyOmer. You can get it on Android, you can get it for iOS, and as I said, it can be customized. It's a very powerful and very popular app. It's also, you can get the emails that come in every day into your inbox with these meditations and exercises, and people use it to actually help them grow and accounting, introspection, and so on. When I did research for this, which really began in a class that I gave many years ago, and I was talking about the idea of chesed shebechesed, so people started asking me, what does it mean? So the first few I knew. Then I started researching. I started asking. Most people had no clue what the rest were. They said, you rely that God will figure it out. Al das hamokim. But we say in the prayer, in the Iyar, that this midos should be refined, etc., etc. So I did research, and I gave out handouts to my class each week. Those handouts became popular. People made copies. So finally, one day, a woman called Ray Ekman, a designer, a graphic designer, an artist, how translating into how can we achieve success at work, in our relationships, in every area of our lives. She develops it into a specific thing using Yosef as a modality of Yosef, Ish Matzliach. Yosef was the symbol of success. using Tzemach Tzedek's Maimarim and other Maimarim, and describing using these three elements, as I said again: bittul, submission; effort, yigia; and Bitachon, trust. The essay speaks for itself, and I definitely encourage all of you to read it, but that's the basic success, according to Chassidus, using those three key elements. I would add one component. You made a very nice also graph, which helps people to work it through in their own personal lives, a type of like a worksheet, a worksheet, and well annotated. Okay, that was the winning essay. As I said, it's all online at meaningfullife.com/essays. Essay number 2 was Eres Bikeilim, a Hebrew essay, The Secret to Healthy Relationship, by Chaim Heber, age 33, Be'er Sheva, Israel. This essay in Hebrew is an excellent essay about relationships and using Eres and Keilim, the model of Chassidus of Eres and Keilim. So he beautifully explains in Hebrew what Eres and Keilim are in very contemporary and very personal terms, and obviously uses the concept of Sefiras Haomer, which is the break of the vessels, with the Eres and Keilim, with the energy and the soul and the body, the energy and the container, the energy and its expression are not aligned. There's a dissonance, and therefore a conflict between them, and how we then deal with resolving it. So the essay is structured by first what are the Eres and Keilim, then the breaking of the containers, and then the refinement, which is called birur and tzutzis, but done in a very psychological and personal way, which I said won second prize in the essay contest. Okay, again, you could look this up as well there. He talks about the search for light, the revelation of light, and how the light should be tailored and customized to each particular container, but written in very personal terms, in relationships, regard to relationships. Essay number 3 was called The Soul. The Soul, a Source of Inherent Self-Worth, by Shaul Wolf, age 25, Brooklyn, New York. This is an English essay, and this essay discusses in a very beautiful way anxiety and what we call today cognitive behavioral therapy, but all in the context of Chassidus and what Chassidus adds to what is out there in secular psychology. Basically, the point being that with all the cognitive distortions that we have, and he describes it in the context of a patient and a therapist, psychologically, the religious, and finally the Chassidic approach, Chassidus adds the neshama, that ultimately having the neshama adds a dimension that regular secular psychology does not have, and even religion sometimes doesn't focus on. And that neshama is ultimately the source of what makes a person feel self-esteem and self-confident, and so on. This, again, is a very excellent essay, and with that we go to the 4th essay. Even though there were meant to be 3 top ones, but the judges felt this essay was a brilliant essay. It's real, because the biggest downside was its length, and due to the guidelines that we gave, even though the length was not, it said a suggested length, but nevertheless, to be fair, so we gave it a 4th prize award, called, and this essay is "A Man of Faith is Lonely." The Man of Faith is Lonely No More, by Levi Liberov, age 26, Brooklyn, New York. And what he does is he takes a tremendous contrast between Rabbi Soloveitchik and Rabbi Chaim, and the Shitta of Soloveitchik and the Brisk, and back to Volozhin, in the idea of the lonely man of faith, of a certain duality between the 2 types of atoms, Atom 1 and Atom 2, and the contrast how Chassidus adds a dimension where ultimately you're not lonely, because there's an integration between the 2. So it's not ultimately trapped in a perpetual conflict, which is essentially the theme as it is in the lonely man of faith, but you get to a place where you can rise above the conflict and you resolve the conflict. That's the gist of it. But he does it in a very comprehensive way. It's an essay of 9,000 words, and does it in a comprehensive way, and really shows us the contribution of Chassidus in a very practical way, in this and philosophical and psychological attitude to the challenges. And the contrast, of course, is tremendous, because it really helps us appreciate what Chassidus came to accomplish. So please check those essays out. And with that, I will conclude this episode 113, MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 113. And yes, it's an altered episode. Pesach continues on. May we continue to have Cherosenu, true freedom, and in this case, psychological, emotional, spiritual freedom, to really discover who we are and what our calling in this life is, in our relationship with God, to be able to dispel the fears, the insecurities, the other things that paralyze and constrict and limit us from really achieving what our mission is in this world. And we should all have a gesunte summer and a gesunte year, and take the Pesach energy into the entire year. So until next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., this has been My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 113. Thank you very much.